There is a body of water so narrow, so strategically vital, that its closure does not merely disrupt markets, it threatens the architecture of modern civilization. The Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile-wide channel between the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranian coastline, is the single most consequential maritime choke point on Earth. Approximately 20% of the world's traded oil and a significant proportion of its liquefied natural gas pass through this corridor every single day, supplying the energy needs of Japan, South Korea, China, India, and much of the global economy. For decades, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps understood this geography as its ultimate weapon, a loaded gun held to the throat of the world. What no one fully anticipated was what would happen when the United States decided to call that bluff, not with diplomacy, but with the most concentrated display of military force the region had witnessed in over 2 decades. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we must trace back the thread of escalation that preceded it. Beginning in late January 2026, the United States carried out its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq, deploying air, naval, and missile defense assets amid escalating tensions with Iran, fueled by a collapsing nuclear negotiation track, mass protests inside Iran, and a regime crackdown that had left thousands of demonstrators dead in the streets. By January 2026, the U.S. naval presence in and around the Middle East was reported to be the largest since the regional crisis began in 2023, with USS Abraham Lincoln arriving on January 26th, alongside guided missile destroyers, cruisers, FA-18E Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, and F-35C Lightning IIs. This was not a show of caution. This was preparation. Tehran read those deployments and responded with its own theater of intimidation. On February 16th, the IRGC began live-fire naval drills in the Strait of Hormuz, announcing a temporary closure of sections of the waterway, a rare move not seen since the 1980s. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, apparently calculating that American restraint had limits that could be exploited indefinitely, issued a warning that U.S. warships deployed to the Gulf could be sunk to the bottom of the sea. Iran's parliament, in a dramatic gesture of brinksmanship, designated the armed forces of European Union member states as terrorist organizations under domestic law. These were not the signals of a government seeking de-escalation. These were the final moves in a high-stakes gamble that was about to go catastrophically wrong. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel initiated coordinated airstrikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership, resulting in the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The operational scope of what followed was staggering. Operation Epic Fury was an air and maritime campaign targeting Iranian command and control centers, IRGC headquarters, ballistic missile sites, Navy ships and submarines, anti-ship missile sites, air defense capabilities, and military airfields. Within days, U.S. Central Command reported that not a single Iranian naval vessel remained underway in the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, or the Gulf of Oman. 17 Iranian warships had been destroyed. The IRGC's conventional maritime deterrent had been effectively neutralized in less than 72 hours. But the battle for Hormuz had only just begun. What Iran lacked in conventional naval power, it more than compensated for in asymmetric cunning. Rather than attempt to engage American air power directly, a contest Tehran could not survive, the IRGC shifted the battlefield to where American technological superiority was far less decisive, the shallow, cluttered waters of the Persian Gulf itself. Iranian naval vessels, drones, and shore-based missile batteries moved to menace commercial shipping, effectively bringing transit through the strait to a near-complete halt since early March 2026. The closure was not accomplished through a conventional naval blockade. It was achieved through terror, systematic, calculated attacks on merchant vessels designed to make the economic risk of passage prohibitive. Ship owners, facing skyrocketing war risk insurance premiums and the very real possibility of losing both cargo and crew, made the rational decision to stay away. The IRGC had turned the world's most important waterway into a shooting gallery. As of mid-March 2026, Iran had made 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships. The Thai-flagged Mayuri Nari caught fire after being struck by an unknown projectile, with 20 crew members rescued by the Royal Navy of Oman and 3 others missing. 2 oil tankers were set ablaze near the port of Basra. Among the confirmed fatalities were at least 7 seafarers, with crew members lost from the Safe Sea Vishnu, the Musafa II, MKD Vyom, and the Skylight. These were not combatants. These were cargo workers, engineers, navigators, ordinary people whose livelihoods became collateral in a geopolitical confrontation they had no part in creating. Approximately 20,000 seafarers found themselves stranded, including those who had signed contracts for ships that could now no longer sail. The human cost of Iran's strategy was not abstract. It had names, nationalities, and families waiting in ports that would never receive their ships. The economic shock radiated outward with brutal efficiency. Brent crude oil prices surpassed $100 per barrel on March 8th for the first time in 4 years, rising to $126 per barrel at its peak. Commodity markets beyond oil buckled under the pressure, with aluminum, fertilizer, and helium all experiencing price surges. The closure has since been described as the largest disruption to the global energy supply since the 1970s oil crisis. Between March 1st and 25th, there were just 142 transits through the Strait of Hormuz, compared to 2,652 transits during the same period in 2025. That is a reduction of nearly 95%. The world's energy jugular had been, for all practical purposes, severed, and the effects were being felt not in Washington or Tel Aviv, but in the factories of South Korea, the gas stations of Tokyo, and the heating bills of European households. Washington's response was not slow in coming, but it was measured with a precision that suggested strategic calculation rather than emotional reaction. On March 17th, U.S. Central Command announced that it had employed multiple GBU-72 5,000-pound penetrator munitions on underground missile silos along the Iranian coast near the Strait, enormous bunker-busting weapons specifically designed to defeat hardened, deeply buried infrastructure. The munitions tore through layers of rock and reinforced concrete to destroy the underground complexes where Iran had stored its reserve inventory of cruise missiles and anti-ship weapons. This was surgical disarmament at scale, stripping Iran of the hidden arsenal it had spent years preparing for exactly this contingency. The IRGC's coastal defense doctrine had assumed these buried bunkers were invulnerable. The GBU-72 rendered that assumption catastrophically false. On March 19th, General Dan Kane announced that the United States was deploying A-10 Thunderbolt II jets to strike fast-attack watercraft, and Boeing AH-64 Apache gunships to handle one-way attack drones in a concerted effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. These were not the weapons of strategic deterrence. These were the weapons of close-in maritime warfare, aircraft built to operate at low altitudes, hunting small, fast-moving targets in cluttered coastal waters. A-10 attack aircraft and Apache helicopters began low-altitude operations over the sea lanes, targeting Iranian fast attack boats and drone launch platforms, while naval forces conducted simultaneous strikes on IRGC bases and shore-based cruise missile batteries. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth subsequently reported that these combined operations had damaged or destroyed more than 120 Iranian naval vessels. The IRGC's fast boat swarm doctrine, its primary asymmetric tool for harassing shipping, was being methodically dismantled vessel by vessel. Yet for all the firepower being brought to bear, a more insidious threat remained. On March 10th, U.S. military intelligence sources reported that Iran had begun planting naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump immediately demanded their removal and announced that the U.S. military had destroyed 16 Iranian mine layers. But destroying the vessels that planted the mines does not detonate the mines already on the seafloor. Mine-clearing operations in contested, shallow, narrow waters are among the most dangerous and technically demanding missions in modern naval warfare. Each mine removed represents hours of painstaking work by specialized vessels and divers operating within range of Iranian shore-based weapons. This was the IRGC's most enduring contribution to the crisis, an obstacle not to be defeated by air power alone, but by patience, precision, and nerve. On March 21st, President Trump issued an ultimatum that stripped away any remaining diplomatic ambiguity. He demanded Iran fully open the Strait of Hormuz without threat within 48 hours, threatening to otherwise strike Iranian power plants, with the biggest one first. Tehran's response was defiant. Iran doubled down, threatening to completely close the strait and strike vital infrastructure across the region, including energy facilities and desalination plants that supplied drinking water to millions of civilians throughout the Gulf states. It was a declaration that Iran was prepared to escalate horizontally, or to transform a maritime confrontation into a regional infrastructure war. The IRGC Navy reiterated that any traffic through the strait would face a severe response, and that passage of any ship going to or from ports belonging to allies and supporters of the United States was explicitly prohibited. The trap, as Tehran conceived it, was closing around the global economy itself. But the trap had a fundamental design flaw, one that the IRGC's strategists, for all their tactical ingenuity, had never fully resolved. Iran's leverage over the Strait of Hormuz was always predicated on the assumption that the United States would be deterred by the cost of confrontation. Washington, for its part, had consistently declared its commitment to maintaining freedom of navigation in the strait as a core national interest, a commitment reiterated explicitly in Trump's 2025 national security strategy, which stated that America would always have core interests in ensuring Gulf energy supplies did not fall into the hands of an outright enemy. That was not merely diplomatic boilerplate, it was a statement of intent backed by more than $800 billion annually in defense spending and the most capable expeditionary military force in human history. When that force was finally directed at the problem without political restraint, the IRGC's carefully constructed defensive system began to fracture. The intelligence dimensions of what unfolded are equally remarkable. On March 26th, Israel announced that it had killed Iran's top naval commander, Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, the architect of the Hormuz blockade, the man who had personally overseen the acquisition of thousands of missiles and naval mines, and who had, according to Israeli officials, become the sole approver of most terror activities carried out in the maritime domain in southern Iran. Tangsiri, 62, born in the Iranian port city of Arvankanar, had been appointed chief of the IRGC Navy in 2018 and had orchestrated hundreds of drone strikes on commercial vessels throughout his years in command. His elimination did not merely remove an individual, it severed the command and control nerve center of Iran's entire maritime strategy at its most critical moment. The IRGC's naval campaign, already under severe pressure from American air power, had just lost the one man who understood its operational architecture completely. The geopolitical fallout extended well beyond the strait itself. On March 15th, Trump called on countries of the world that receive oil through the Hormuz Strait to take care of that passage militarily. The response from America's closest allies was, to put it diplomatically, underwhelming. Germany, Spain, Italy, the United Kingdom, Australia, South Korea, and Japan all declined, with German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius bluntly stating that this is not our war, we have not started it. Trump called their refusal a very foolish mistake. Secretary of State Marco Rubio noted that other countries get far more of their fuel from the strait than the United States does, and that it was therefore in their interest to help. The fracture that opened between Washington and its European partners over this episode may outlast the crisis itself. a reminder that the architecture of Western alliance unity, however durable it has appeared, carries its own structural stresses when the costs of solidarity become concrete. The IRGC, confronting the accelerating dismantlement of its naval capability, reached for a novel and revealing tactic. In the final week of March, the IRGC created what analysts described as a toll booth, a passageway through Iranian territorial waters around Larak Island, allowing Iran to grant safe passage to commercial ships for a price. This was not the behavior of a force winning a confrontation. This was the behavior of a command structure attempting to extract residual leverage from a deteriorating position, monetizing the threat it could no longer fully enforce through military action alone. The scheme carried a certain dark ingenuity, but it also exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Iran's strategy. A power that can effectively close the world's most important shipping lane doesn't need to charge tolls to let ships through. The toll booth was a concession dressed up as control. While U.S. forces have destroyed 92% of Iran's large naval vessels, officials warn that smaller, agile boats capable of laying mines and launching attacks still pose a serious threat to ships attempting to pass through the strategic waterway. The campaign to reopen Hormuz is not over. The United States has offered Iran a 15-point proposal for a ceasefire that includes relinquishing control of the strait, while simultaneously ordering thousands more troops to the region, possibly in preparation for a military attempt to wrest the waterway from Iran's grip entirely. The diplomatic and military tracks are running in parallel, each applying a different form of pressure, each designed to leave Tehran with a narrowing range of options that do not end in catastrophe for the regime itself. What this crisis has demonstrated, with a clarity that decades of diplomatic hedging obscured, is that Iran's great strategic weapon was also its greatest strategic vulnerability. The Strait of Hormuz gave Tehran leverage over the global economy, but only so long as using that leverage was not perceived as crossing a threshold that would trigger overwhelming American military response. The moment that threshold was crossed, the weapon became a liability. Every mine planted, every tanker struck, every crew member killed provided justification for the progressive destruction of the IRGC's naval infrastructure that took years to build and cannot be replaced in months. Iran attempted to use Hormuz as a shield. The United States turned it into a target. The deeper lesson resonates far beyond the Persian Gulf. Regular IRGC naval exercises, combined with increasingly sophisticated drone fleets, shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, and fast-attack boat swarms, had transformed Iran's maritime posture from a nuisance threat into a genuinely formidable defensive system, or so it appeared from the outside. What the past 4 weeks have revealed is the gap between the appearance of strategic capability and its operational reality when confronted by an adversary with the resources, political will, and technological superiority to systematically dismantle it. Doctrines built on asymmetric deterrence assume that the stronger power will choose restraint. When that assumption proves false, the entire edifice collapses. The men who designed Iran's Hormuz strategy over the past 2 decades were not fools. They understood geography, they understood energy economics, and they understood the psychological weight of threatening the global oil supply. What they may have miscalculated, fatally, was the character of the moment they chose to act, and the character of the administration in Washington prepared to respond. The trap they built for the world economy became, in the end, a trap they built for themselves. The strait may yet take weeks or months to fully reopen. The mines must be cleared, the shore batteries silenced, and some form of political resolution reached that gives Tehran an off-ramp without emboldening future aggression. None of that will be easy. But the trajectory of this confrontation has shifted irrevocably. The IRGC's maritime strategy, its most prized instrument of coercive power, lies in the waters of the Persian Gulf, alongside the wreckage of the fleet that was supposed to enforce it. History will record February 28, 2026, as the day a decades-long geopolitical bluff was finally called. The full consequences of that moment are still unfolding day by day in the smoke over the Gulf, in the surging price of oil on global markets, and in the quiet calculation of every nation that has watched what happens when asymmetric deterrence meets the full weight of American resolve. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen. The question that will define the next chapter of Middle Eastern geopolitics is what kind of Iran and what kind of world order emerges on the other side.